Oh, okay. So after a bit of a hiatus due to internet troubles, we're back. And almost time to start. Got a bit of a live audience here today, too. 3 people sitting in the cabin. 4 if you count the cat.
Cats are people, too.
It's Ted. How you doing? Yeah, there's our friend Yankee Apple. Just checked in.
Say hello from us. Tell him we know him.
Okay, yeah. People here are saying hello for you. Okay. Yeah, here she is. Say hello to the people there, Shadow. We're going to be talking about the 5 precepts today, and she doesn't keep any of them, so she might be a good example of what not to do.
How about rice peach?
Oh, she's always making a racket. Okay. Okay, just waiting for 6 o'clock. It's a couple of minutes yet. I apologize for missing the last couple of weeks, but that's unavoidable. The satellite internet. There will be times when it don't work. But we are on the waiting list for Starlink, which is supposed to be considerably better. Yeah.
Sorry, if you remember, the less you move back and forth,
Yeah.
the better the
Yeah.
picture.
It's 6 o'clock.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So today I'm going to talk about the second parami, which is Sila, or morality. To recap the idea of paramis, or paramita, they are spiritual qualities that are conducive to awakening, and um, the Buddha is said to be the only being who has all 10 paramis absolutely perfect to the last degree. Um, but the more of the paramis you develop, the better off you are, the more advanced you will become spiritually. And they are treasures that carry on from lifetime to lifetime. So when you develop a parami, that will give you uh, something that goes forward. And if you allow a parami to be lost, if you uh, diminish your paramis, then you'll suffer for it. So Sila is a very important part of the path. It's the foundation stone. The path of the Eightfold Path of the Buddha is sometimes simplified to 3 levels or stages of Sila, Samadhi, Panya, or ethics, meditation, and wisdom. And Sila is the basis, and without Sila, the other 2 are impossible to develop. So it's not something that we can safely neglect. We have to always protect and nourish our Sila. There's a kind of funny linguistic thing that in Thai language, they never put when they adopt a Pali word, they usually drop off the terminal vowel, and they can't pronounce a word that ends in an L sound. A syllable has to end in only a few narrow range of sounds. So Sila in Thai becomes sin. And I remember giving a talk once, and was on the point of precepts, and there was one Thai man in the room, and he said, Ajahn, I'm very glad you're talking about this. It's very important that people develop more sin. And everyone else was puzzled, and what is he talking about? So I had to explain that. But Sila means morality, ethics, and the very simplest formulation to say is that an act is moral if it reduces suffering for self and others, and is immoral if it increases suffering for self and others. That's the simplest formulation. We also in Buddhism, we don't tend to use the words good and evil very much. We talk about kusala and akusala, which literally means skillful and unskillful. So when you're acting kusala, skillfully, that means that your actions and your deeds are creating positive karma that will result in pleasant future experience. And if you make akusala karma, it will lead to unpleasant results in the future. So it puts a whole different kind of feeling to the idea of morality. It's not a judgmental kind of thing. It's a skillful behavior. It's behaving well, is behaving skillfully. The formula for the practice of Sila is in terms of the precepts, the basic 5 precepts that are incumbent on all Buddhists. And the first thing to notice is that the formula for taking the precepts is when it's chanted in Pali. The formula for each precept is Sikkhapadani Samadhiyami. And that translates as, I will endeavor to walk this path of training. So it has, again, a whole different feel from a commandment. It's not, thou shalt do this, thou shalt not do that. It's, here's the wise advice about how you can live skillfully. And you'll make a effort, you'll make a commitment to attempt to follow that path of training. Sikkhapadani Samadhiyami. So the 5 precepts, the first one is Panatipata Veramani, which is literally, I shall endeavor to refrain from destruction of breathing things. Panatipata is breathing things. And this is the precept against taking life of sentient beings. So it's basically an injunction against killing any sentient being, which are, for practical purposes, are animals and humans. You probably won't get the opportunity to kill a yaka or a dewa, very, very likely. So it's only really animals and humans we're concerned with. And of course, killing a human is a greater breach of morality than killing an animal. And killing your mother, your father, or an arahant is the heaviest negative karma. Is considered to be such a grave karma that if you commit that act of killing of your mother, your father, or an arahant, you are disbarred from attaining a stream entry this lifetime, and you will be reborn in the lower realms for certain in your next life. The act of killing, and this applies really to all the precepts, but it's maybe most evident here. The act of killing must be deliberate and knowing. So if you step on an insect accidentally, say, that's not a breach of the precept. This is an important point that differentiates Buddhist understanding of ethics from Jain. The Buddhists held that karma is ultimately made in the mind. You have a volition to kill and you carry it out with the body. And the intention of the volition is the critical thing. Whereas the Jains held that karma is also made by the body. So if you step on an insect accidentally, for a Jain, they consider that to be a bad karma. So the Jain monks will take elaborate precautions to avoid killing insect life. But the intention is the thing in the Buddhist understanding, because that's the moment when karma is actually made, the volitional act. Someone came up with an example, a rather colorful example of how intention determines the karma. The simple physical act of one man sticking a knife into the belly of another man could be good, kusala, bad, akusala, or neutral. If it's a surgeon trying to save the man's life and he puts a scalpel in his belly to open it up in surgery, then that's a good intention, good karma. It's obviously, if it's a robber stabbing the guy to take his money, that's bad karma. And in the third case, if a man were standing at the corner peeling a piece of fruit with his knife, and the other man runs around the corner heedlessly and impales himself on the knife, then there's no karma for the fellow with the knife. So intention is the critical factor. And as I said, this could be mutus mutandis applied to all the precepts. The second precept is adinadana veramani, which literally means taking that which is not given. And this is the precept against theft. So taking what is not given. So the determining factor is there's an object that is someone else's property, and you know it's their property, and they haven't given it to you, and you take it, then that's theft. It's pretty simple, straightforward. And giving might be, a gift, or it might be an exchange, or money owed, something like that. It's a voluntary transfer by the giver in some capacity or other. And if that's not present and you appropriate the property anyway, then it's considered a breach of the precept. The third precept is kamesu michachara veramani, which translates as wrong or misconduct in sensual matters. And this is the precept against sexual misconduct. And of course, that's raises a question of definition. And this is something that does differ between different schools of Buddhism, but in the Theravada formulation, it's basically a precept against adultery, against having sexual relations with someone who's already otherwise engaged. And the definition is given in terms of the male person, but it could be just all turned around and applied to the female exactly the same. But it's given in terms of inappropriate partner. And an inappropriate partner is someone who's already married or engaged or under the protection of their parents, so it would be like underage, or who has taken religious vows. Well, so it's actually a fairly liberal standard in that a sexual act between two consenting, unattached adults is not a breach of the precept. It might be unskillful in another sense, in that its indulgence in sensuality can be taken to, it's not necessarily immoral, but it does keep one within the sense desire sphere. The fourth precept is musawada veramani, which is the precept against wrong speech. And that's given in the expansion, and the definition is given as fourfold. False speech, harsh speech, slander, and foolish babbling. So, and the one against wrong speech is the one that's most emphasized. The one against false speech, against lying. There's we'll come later in this series. One of the Pãramīs is such a Pãramī, the Pãramī of truth, and the emphasis on truth in the Buddhist teaching is very strong. And telling a deliberate lie is really a harmful act, because you are knowingly and deliberately implanting delusion in someone else's consciousness. You're giving them some false idea, something not in accord with reality. And again, this has to be done knowingly and deliberately. If you're honestly mistaken and you say something wrong that you honestly believe, that's not a lie. No. Breaking a promise is also considered a lie in this sense. So it's advisable if it's not possible to, or if it's not comfortable to speak the truth, it's better to remain silent. Keeping the holy silence is always an option. Harsh speech is abusive speech, like insulting someone, calling them down, berating them. Slander or gossip is spreading tales here and there to damage someone else's reputation. It's a very human failing, but it's something to be avoided. And if you are the recipient of gossip, a good practice is to then find something positive to say about the person. Oh yeah, but I know he did that, but also you remember when he did this and that. And the last one is foolish babbling, is tirachanakata, literally means horizontal going speech. It's sometimes translated as animal speech because animals are one of the names for animal is tirachana. The word tirachana literally means horizontal going because their spines, they're working on four legs, their spines are horizontal to the ground. And I think that the meaning here is not so much animal, reference to animals, but to lowliness, like to sort of triviality, like spending time babbling about nonsense and just kind of filling up the empty space with chatter. There's a very good teaching in one of the suttas about the speech that a Tathagata or Buddha would utter and what he would not utter. And it's fourfold. There's the speech that a Tathagata would utter is always true and not otherwise. The speech that a Tathagata would utter is always meaningful and not otherwise. And the word for meaning in Pali is atta, which is a very important, powerful word. In India, was often paired with dhamma and atta. And atta means like importance, significance, weight, gravity. So the Buddha's speech is always true and it's meaningful and it's beneficial. It's the third one. So it's not just idle noise. It has a purpose. It's beneficial. It helps the listener in some way. And the fourth one is interesting. It says that the Buddha's speech, having met the other three criteria, the Buddha's speech is either pleasant to hear or spoken at the right time. So you can imagine if there's something that you can say that's true and meaningful and beneficial, and it's also pleasant, good, the person will enjoy hearing it. You can feel free to say it, no problem, anytime. But sometimes you need to say something that's true and meaningful and beneficial, but the person will not find it pleasant, like a valid criticism. So you have to wait for the right time. And this takes skill to know the right time. There's some guideline in the Vinaya about when a monk should admonish another monk. And this can be applied generally. First of all, he should examine his mind to make sure he's free of the fault he wants to criticize the other of. if he has the same fault in any degree, then he should just be quiet until he's purified himself of it. He has no business speaking up. Secondly, he should examine his own mind and make sure that he's free of anger. And if he's angry, he should be quiet until he calms down. And the third one is, to the best of his ability, as far as he can, he should try and judge. And this is the trickiest one. He should judge the other person's state of mind to determine whether he'll actually hear what has to be said or he'll just be resistant. And he has to wait until such a time as the person is ready to hear it. So if we follow these rules, a lot of times we'll just be quiet. So the fifth precept is Sura Miriya Majapamattadana Varamani, which is the precept against consuming alcohol. The literal translation of the Pali is brewed, fermented, or distilled drinks. So, wine, beer, and spirits. And the precept is against the consumption of any substance that will befuddle the mind in such a way that it might cause one to act foolishly or heedlessly. The equivalent rule in the Vinaya for the bhikkhus, the origin story for this was that a bhikkhu had done a service. He had psychic powers, and he'd done a service for the villagers by driving a fire-breathing naga from their bathhouse. There's actually several of these incidents in the Vinaya and elsewhere of fire-breathing nagas seem to enjoy a sauna, and they would always be hanging out in the bathhouse and then have to be driven out. And the villagers were so grateful. They talked amongst themselves. So what should we do when he comes on alms round? We should give him something special. Well, what do the monks not get very often? They don't get toddy, which is alcoholic drink. So all the villagers agreed that when he came to their house, they would give him a little shot of toddy. So by the time he got back to the monastery, he was 3 sheets to the wind. He was staggering, and he walked into the Sila, and the Buddha was sitting there, and this monk just flopped down on the floor and fell asleep, snoring with his feet pointing towards the Buddha, which in Asian culture is a really big insult, to point your feet at someone. And the Buddha said, what's going on with this monk? He was always so well behaved and such a good bhikkhu, and look at him today. And the monks told him what had happened in the village, and then the Buddha laid down the rule: don't take alcoholic drinks. And the reason given is because it can make you act foolish and do things you otherwise wouldn't do. And then it's extended to any substance that would cause us to behave in a foolish way and possibly do things that we regret later. There's a Tibetan story about this precept. That there was a man in the village who was well known for being a highly moral person and never breaking any of the precepts. And one day he was in the forest gathering firewood, and a yaka saw him there and thought, I'll test this guy. We'll see. Everyone says he's so moral. And the yaka seizes him and says, I'll kill you right now unless you break one of the precepts. So this poor fellow, shaking with fear, this monstrous yak has got him by the throat. He says, he thinks to himself, well, what's the least harm I could do with breaking a precept? Well, I guess it wouldn't be so bad if I took a drink. So he told the yaka he'll break the 5th precept. And the yaka gives him a glass of barley wine, and he drinks it down. And lets him go, and he goes back to the village, and of course he's shaking with the aftermath of this experience. And as he's going through the village, he's passing the grog shop, and he thinks to himself, well, I've already had one drink, I've already kind of done it, and I really shook up. I guess it wouldn't do any more harm to have a couple more. And he sits down and drinks a couple more glasses, and then he goes home. And when he gets home, he's now hungry, and he's looking in his cupboard, and he's got nothing to eat. But then he looks out the window, and he sees the neighbor's chicken scratching around, and there's nobody around. So he jumps outside real quick and grabs the chicken, and he takes it inside and wrings its neck, and he's cutting it up, getting it ready to make a meal. And there's a knock on the door, and it's the neighbor's pretty young wife. And she says, has our chicken wandered off into your yard again? We can't find her. And he says, oh, no, I haven't seen your chicken. But tell you what, I'm just getting supper ready. Are you interested? Would you like to come in for a bite? And then by the morning, he'd breaken all 5 precepts. So, so the whole point of this precept is that cause you to act foolishly. So these are the 5 precepts, and the expansions of the 5 precepts, 8 precepts, the Atta Sila, is an extension of sense restraint. They're not the additional precepts. It's not eating in the afternoon, not sleeping in comfortable beds, avoiding entertainment and cosmetics. They are not, strictly speaking, moral injunctions, but injunctions of restraint. The precepts for the bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, for bhikkhus there's 227, there's more for the bhikkhunis. They are in large part, they're extensions or elaborations of the 5. And the Parajika rules, there's 4 Parajika rules. They are special cases of the first 4 of the 5 precepts. Parajika rules are the heaviest rules in the bhikkhu's vinaya. If a bhikkhu breaks a Parajika rule, they're disrobed immediately just by the commission of the act. And if they continue to wear the robe, they're just play acting. They're just false bhikkhus. And the first one is sexual intercourse of any kind is a Parajika. And the second is theft of anything above a very trivial amount is a Parajika. Third one is killing of a human being is a Parajika. And the fourth one is telling a lie about having attained superhuman states, such as enlightenment, is a Parajika. So it's a special case of the wrong speech. It's possible for, and the lesser versions of these rules are covered in other minor rules in the Vinaya. So killing an animal is an offense, but it's not a Parajika offense, for example. One other topic or theme I wanted to touch on before concluding is something that I think is a significant difference between Theravada and Mahayana in their grounding or basis of ethics. In the Theravada, the ethical principles are principally considered from the point of view of the actor, the one who performs the action. And the ultimate purpose, if you analyze it down and you take an Abhidhamma kind of approach, the ultimate purpose of keeping morality is to refine the mind. Because anytime you break a precept, that means that prior to that, there must have been a defiled state of mind. And the acting out in the world of that is secondary. It's a resultant or a outgrowth. It's not really resultant technically, but it's an outgrowth of that first initial idea in the mind. And this means that keeping the precepts is actually a very good, it's more than just morality in the simple sense. It's also a very good mind training and very important basis for developing higher states of mind. We take the first precept, for example, where we live here in Northern Ontario, in season, there's a great many small biting insects, mosquitoes and black flies. And I like to tell people that they're here to teach you harmlessness. There's people in the world who don't consider, Buddhist ethics. If a mosquito lands on them, they slap at it, right? You just kill it heedlessly. And if people start, they hear about the precepts and they want to learn to abide by the precepts, then at first it's for most of us, it's not hard to, refrain from killing human beings. We don't do that anyway. But it is, for most people, it's a hard training to not kill the mosquitoes. Right? That's a difficult thing. They're working against an impulse. So what happens when you keep a precept like that? Is something like the old idea of making it or faking it till you make it, right? At first, you still have that state of mind of wanting to kill the mosquito, but you restrain yourself. And that actually trains and refines your mind until the impulse to kill fades away. And you develop ahimsa, harmlessness. And same sort of principle applies with all the precepts. You by restraining on a coarse bodily level, you actually begin to train and refine the mind. So, as I said, in the Theravada, the precepts are considered ultimately as a way of training the mind. In the Mahayana, I see that there's a different emphasis. There's a sense that the practice of ethics is considered more from the perspective of the recipient of the action, so that compassion becomes the primary virtue governing a person's ethics. And compassion is, at least in some quarters of the Mahayana, Mahayana is a broad category, but in some quarters of the Mahayana, compassion is felt to trump the precepts. So you can break any of the precepts if it's done out of compassion. Now, the one extreme story example of this is in the biography of the Tibetan sage Padmasambhava, the traditional hagiographical biography of him, says that he was walking in the market one day and he saw a market girl squatting down beside her knickknacks or whatever she's selling, and a fly landed on her forehead. And Padmasambhava, quick as a wink, picked up a cobblestone and threw it with all his might and struck her in the forehead, killing her and the fly together instantly. So he's seized by the king's man as a murderer, and they sentence him to death, and they put him on a big pile of wood and light it on fire. And when the wood's all burned up, he's sitting there in lotus posture, completely unharmed, and they're all awestruck. And he explains that because of his great psychic gifts, he could see that this girl and the fly were karmically entwined, and for many lifetimes, one had killed the other, and they kept changing places. Like in one lifetime, one of them's a hunter and the other's a deer, and in another lifetime, one's a fish and the other's a crane, or and they keep switching roles, the killer and the killed. And the girl was just about to smash the fly, and that would have kept the karmic cycle going. And the only way to break it was to kill them both together instantly. So this is a, and he was acting out of great compassion, right? So breaking the first precept out of great compassion. So this is a story that would never occur in a Theravada context. So that, but the Mahayana criticize that our understanding of ethics as being selfish and legalistic. Like we would stick to the letter of the law, and rather than act out of compassion. And whatever merits there may be in that criticism, I think that our way is at least safer. If you allow compassion as a trump card to break any precept, then it's quite easy to justify any sort of wrongdoing. You'd have to have the extreme wisdom, be highly developed spiritually to actually put that into practice. You can always make an excuse. Well, this is a compassionate thing here to do. I'm acting out of compassion when I do this. So keeping the precepts in a literal or legalistic sense takes our personal interests out of the picture, and our ability to look for loopholes and waffle around. It's quite clear. You don't kill a sentient being. You don't take that which doesn't belong to you. You don't mess around with someone else's wife. You don't tell lies, and you don't take intoxicants. And with the development of morality, the benefit is a mind that's at peace, at ease. You don't have to be feeling guilty or regretful. So this allows the mind to rest and develop in meditation. And it creates good karma, so that your future rebirths will be fortunate. If you're breaking the precepts, then you're headed for a worse rebirth. So I think I'll stop there, and I'm happy to stay on the line for a while and answer questions. Anything comes up here, just type into the chat if you've got a question. Let's let the see if it comes out here first, okay. And then I'll take questions from here, from the floor. Can you please explain how to avoid the chatter? Don't engage in it. You don't have to criticize other people, but you just don't feed it. There's a story of a bhikkhu in the time of the Buddha who was quite fond of drinking, but was still able to reach stream entry after swiftly abandoning his drinking habits. Any thought on this? Yeah, well, it wasn't a bhikkhu, that was a layperson, and he did attain stream entry, even though he was known to be a drinker before. And I think, well, one thing we can take from this is that we can always turn around. We can always reform and improve. There's the story of Angulimala, who was a murderer, mass murderer, killed hundreds of people, and then the Buddha converted him, and he became an arahant eventually. Okay, I'll take a question now from the live listeners, because the chat is kind of slowed down. So, Ajahn Subro, you're going to ask something.
Okay, you mentioned earlier about how in Asian culture it's rude to point your feet at
Yes.
Buddha, or I guess any monk or anyone.
Yes.
I have a hard time remembering, and I might be wrong, times in the early Buddhist texts where that's actually said or explained. Maybe that comes from Asian culture outside the early Buddhist text somewhere.
Well, it's in that story in the Vinaya.
Oh,
Mhm.
the pointing of feet. Okay.
Yeah,
About
because
getting
it's
drunk.
it's pointed out as his gross behavior was, first of all, snoring like a pig, and second, lying with his feet pointing towards the Buddha. So I think it was something that it's not mentioned much because it's probably just taken so much for granted.
I guess I'm wondering, like, why? Why is that an insult? It doesn't come intuitively to a Westerner.
I don't know. Having lived in Thailand myself, it seems now I perceive it as gross.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, it's cultural, but it's sort of makes sense. Your feet are the lowest, dirtiest part of your body, and you don't point them. You don't expose your souls to people, basically.
Or like, just in case there's dirt on them and they look really disgusting, and shows the disgustingness to them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Lower class Thai, like ruffians, if they want to insult each other, they'll point their feet.
Like they'll be like.
Yeah. Would you say that the practice dedicated to just sensory clarity in regards to the aggregates eventually also would lead to good Sila? Well, that's sort of putting the cart before the horse. If you have bad Sila, you're not going to be able to develop clarity. Your mind will always be confused and fogged. You won't be able to develop. You won't be able to develop that sort of peace, inner peace that leads to samadhi. What about the use of repellents with regard to insects? Well, if it's a repellent, if it just keeps them away, it doesn't kill them. That's not a breach of the precept. You're not obligated to feed the mosquitoes. In the Umanawatu, one boy took refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha and observed the precepts for a short time before he got killed. He went to Taoist things of heaven. What are your thoughts on this? Yeah, there's a lot of stories like in the Umanawatu. If people don't know, that's a whole book of stories about people who, from various good deeds, they go to heaven, and then a description of their heavenly palaces and so on. And often the form the story takes is Moggallana's up there visiting that realm, and he asks him, "Well, what did you do on earth to earn this great, lovely palace?" And they'll explain it. So often the theme of the stories is that some very rather trivial act, but done with a wholehearted devotion, will often lead to these great results in the next life. Okay. Plus, you expel negative energy from the soles of the feet. So there is an energetic reason not to point your feet towards someone. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that actually makes sense.
So the pointing of feet means the pointing of the soles, or does it mean the pointing of the toes?
Well, the soles is worse, but the toes are. You just don't point your feet.
Okay, like not even toes, and especially not soles.
Right. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Huh.
Regarding the precept on drugs and alcohol, what about cannabis and hallucinogens? What are your view? Would there be space for these as medicines? such as harm reduction for the opioid crisis. Well, if there is an allowance if things are used medicinally, like if you take a painkiller to reduce physical pain, that's different than taking a drug in order to seek intoxication. But the general use, like I'm not sure about medical marijuana. I don't know enough about that, what the actual benefits of it are, but just using marijuana recreationally would be a breach of the precept. Are white lies considered to be breaking the fourth precept? Yes. Any speaking of untruth. Can a substance be inherently unwholesome, a fermented beverage, or does unwholesomeness arise in the intention? Oh, a substance is not wholesome or unwholesome. It's just a substance. Like alcohol, you can use to sterilize a wound, or you can drink it to get drunk. It's not. It's not the unwholesomeness is not in the substance. The substance is inert. It doesn't have karma. There is a sutta where a monk who was deathly ill kills himself. The next morning, the Buddha proclaimed he had gone to Nibbana. Could you explain this? Thank you. Yeah, that's has been a lot of discussion and controversy around that sutta. There was a monk who was in great pain from some physical ailment, and he took the knife, as they say. He did himself in. But at least the commentary says that at the last minute he attained arahantship, so there was no karma attached to his act. Suicide is generally considered as a general rule, a very negative karma, and has a strong tendency to lower rebirth. There is the only exception that is made is an arahant who has some debilitating physical ailment. So there's no point in him hanging around. He's already done the work, and he can't be any good for anybody else when he's lying in bed suffering. So there's no harm for him to do it, an arahant. For anyone else, it's bad karma. Okay. Anybody else here got a question?
Yes. I have lots as usual, but
Okay.
I'll do one to start with. And it's maybe least important to me, but it's kind of funny. And it's about, principles that we understand and we know why. But then sometimes, or maybe even often, in a concrete situation, you don't quite know. And then there is this woman, Dipama, the teacher, and she's in Theravada tradition, and she was asked that question, like a concrete question, like, okay, but what do I do? I'm walking down the street and this guy comes to rape me or something and attacks me. Like, what do I do? Like, am I to not use any violence? And she says, fill your heart with compassion, and then take your umbrella and beat him on his head as hard as you can.
Yeah.
And I like that one so much. And the way I read it is, you do what needs to be done.
Yes.
But you don't come from the hate.
Yeah. Well, I can give an example from the Vinaya for monks. There's a rule against violence, striking someone, but if there's an exception, if someone attacks you, you can counter with sufficient violence in order for you to escape.
Mm-hmm.
So if someone's coming at you with a knife and you punch him and knock him down, that's actually okay. But then when he's down, if you kick him, then
Yeah.
you cross the line, right? You've got you just enough violence to end the situation and escape.
But this question, sorry, I'm now going into discussion. This question that Dipana answered, it's to the same question like in Bhagavad Gita, isn't it? Shall I almost?
Yeah,
go
yeah,
to
yeah.
war or
Well,
not?
then the Bhagavad Gita was written as
Yeah.
to some degree as an anti-Buddhist
Mhm.
text,
Yeah.
and the dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna touches on dharma anatta, and it's the warrior's duty to
Yeah.
kill people in the war. That's not a Buddhist position.
Not even Mahayana.
Well, Mahayana is different. I can think of some cases in Mahayana where that would come closer to the Hindu view.
Yeah.
Got some questions here.
Mhm.
They're piling up. After stream entry, is taking the knife acceptable? There are some divided opinions on this. I would say no, because a stream winner is still subject to rebirth. Stream winner can't take a lower rebirth, but if he kills himself, he might be born into an unfortunate human birth. It doesn't end. Basically, suicide doesn't end your problems. You're just creating an extra bad karma for next time around. If mindfulness of breathing is too hard, is it good to try kasina meditation? Okay, it's getting off the main topic, but I'll answer that briefly and say, yeah, everybody's different. Whatever you find as an object that you can develop unity of mind and peacefulness and stability of mind on, that's good for you. And for many people, it's mindfulness of breathing. Some people, it might be kasina. That's fine. And go with it. How would medically assisted dying be considered? That would be against Buddhist precepts. Euthanasia would be totally against the first precept. There's, if I can be allowed a little rant here, I think it's terrible the way our society has got such a anti-life ethic in many ways. It's put such a low value on human life. If it's inconvenient, just end it. Even before it starts, like abortion. Would you think the Christian term of following the unfolding of God's will is synonymous with equanimity to impermanence? Yeah, I hadn't thought about that before, but I could see a parallel there. Okay. Okay, so last chance. Any more questions, or we'll end the stream, and hopefully we're good to go again next week. Okay, I'll take my leave. Thank you all for attending, and I'll put the announcement up later for next week's talk. Bye all.